Are you into horror? Oh my god, me too! In my bedroom growing up, I had a small door that would lead to the attic space. Sometimes I would see it open, and I'd just shut it, not really thinking much of it. I just assumed that my mom didn't close it all the way when she left it open. After a while, though, I made the mistake of joking with her when she made a comment about me not picking up after myself. I said something like, "Every night I have to close the attic door behind you, so how about you shut it all the way when you're done, huh?" Well, that's when she informed me that she hasn't been in the attic in months. So I asked my brother. Nope. Asked my father. Nope. Started to pay really close attention to it, making sure that it was closed in the morning, checking up on it after school, checking it after dinner, then before bed. And there it was, open. After a couple months of this, wondering, studying, experimenting with it, I thought that I'd see what happens if I just don't shut the door. So the one morning I opened it before school. When I got home, I checked it, still open. Before heading to bed, still open. Now I'm laying in bed, mind going crazy, thinking about this open door across the room. So I decided to check it out. I rolled over and focused on the blank space into the attic to see a face staring back at me. I bolted downstairs to my parents. I wake them up terrified, just to get ridiculed by my brother. Get to switch rooms with him, though. Move into the new house about 6 months later. I guess our new physics teacher and his wife bought our house. I probably could have forgotten all about that event and chalked it up to me having an overactive imagination. But then my senior year, I discovered how awesome our physics teacher was. It became my favorite class and my favorite teacher. At the end of senior year, my friend and I took our VHS camcorder around town, doing mostly silly things, but then I took it to my old house to see what they've done with the place. Got a very fun tour. I got to tell stories about all the projects that my dad did that were actually still part of the house. Then the wife leads us upstairs to show us the sewing room. I asked jokingly, "Notice anything strange in this room?" And her face goes completely blank. On camera, she asks, "What do I mean?" I try to shrug it off, but I just end up saying something about the attic door. She confirmed that every time she comes up to sew, the attic door is open. She then tells us that the second day of being in the house, their dog, a German Shepherd, had gone into the room, but would not go back downstairs. She said he started barking and he couldn't be consoled. And then he jumped through the window, landing on the tin roof over the porch and then running off. The dog didn't come back until the next day, and didn't even step foot into the hallway that leads upstairs since then. This happened when I was 17. I'm 32 now. Graduated high school and got my first apartment. Nice town. Lived all by myself, other than my cat Snowball. Don't laugh. I named her when I was 8. A few details before we get started. I've never been a fan of cat boxes. It's the worst part of being a cat owner. Shoveling tiny shit with a tiny shovel every day. So I got one of those motion-activated self-scooping deals. Left it on the back patio, ran the cord inside to power it, and left the back sliding door open, just big enough for her to get in and out. 5 or 6 inches, I guess. Patio is one of those 8x8 cement floored types, surrounded by a 5-foot-tall wooden fence. From my bedroom door, you'd be facing right at the sliding door with hanging blinds. Living room in between, kitchen that's off to the right. So I'm playing 56K Counter-Strike at the computer in my room with my back facing the door. And it's probably about midnight or 1 a.m. I hear Snowball start to make one of those awful cat growling roar noises in the back of her throat. I'm pretty locked into the game, so I just tell her to knock it off without even looking at her. She keeps doing it though, and I tell her to shut up, getting irritated because I'm not doing well in the round. She gets even louder, like really loud, enough to break me from my gaming zone out. And I just realize it's not normal. So I get up from my computer to see her standing in the doorway facing out. Her back is to me. She's in full-on Halloween cat mode, hair sticking straight out. Her back's completely arched. She looks tense. I've never seen her that way. She's just going crazy. Wow! I look into the living room where she's facing. Nothing's amiss. There's nothing there. I look down at her to say something to the effect of, like, what's the matter? What are you growling at? She makes this insane sound, like a combination of hissing, growling, and spitting. She starts to take a few steps backwards. That's when a tiny creature runs out of the fucking kitchen on 2 legs, wearing a tattered piece of cloth or a bag or something like that. It looked like a little cloak. It's probably a foot, maybe a 1.5 feet tall, if that. It's a real fucking jump scare. The cat jumps backwards about 3 feet in the air. I jump. I glance down at her as if she does this, but I just look back up and I hear her land with a crash behind me, and then she runs. I'm fixated on the creature, that thing. It's moving, but it's like time slowed down or something. I'm watching these things happen, but everything's so fast. It runs out the back door through the blinds with a crash at speeds that don't even seem natural. The blinds are swinging. My heart's pounding. I just stand there, dumbfounded. What the fuck did I just see? I'm staring at the back patio door, at the swinging blinds. I'm not moving. My eyes start to notice that something's wrong. The blinds are softly swinging, except for the 2 closest to the opening. They're making an inverted V. I look at them and follow them down to the very bottom. And between them I see it. Its head poking through the blinds, staring at me. It has yellow eyes and a face that can only be described as bestial, gray, greenish, maybe blackish skin. At this point, a singular loud thought fills my mind. You are not supposed to see this. And the conclusion of that thought, every one of the hanging blinds shoots upwards and outwards. I jump again and my heart tries to blast out of my chest. Some of them are hitting the ceiling. A few actually fall off. It's a loud racket. The rest are swinging all over the place. I look at the place where its face was and it's just gone. I beeline it for the kitchen. Refrigerator doors open. I open a drawer and grab the biggest knife I can see. I'm shaking. Adrenaline like I've never experienced before. I rush to the sliding door and slam it shut. It won't close. I open it a bit and slam it back shut. It still won't close. What the fuck? I'm completely stupid. The catbox cord. I crouch down, brandishing the knife like a complete idiot, looking out the glass door, waiting for this thing to launch at my face or something. I'm shaking. I reach across myself with my left hand to the power plug on the wall to the right, as I'm staring out, waiting to stab anything that approaches. I fumble to get it unplugged. My hands won't do anything right. I finally get the cord unplugged, and I open the door to a real quick throw to the cord outside. I throw it out like a spaz and it hits the wall, the side of the door, and it falls down. Still inside. Fuck. Pick it up. Try again. And this time it lands outside. I hear scratching. My eyes dart up. I see 2 tiny, awful fucking hands holding onto the fence. Clawed, gnarly, humanoid hands. This thing climbed down feet first, hanging from the fence. It would have been slightly comical if it wasn't so fucking terrifying. The hands let go, and I hear it land in the bushes outside of the fence. And I hear the footstep as it runs off. I slam the door and I lock it. This really happened to me. I've heard it all, though. It's a raccoon. It was a cat with mange trapped in a paper bag. It was neither of those things. It was both of those things. After the event started, I began researching like a madman. The closest thing I found was in a book at the library called Fairies, which is an art book featuring all different types of Irish folk creatures. I don't live in Ireland. I live in the US, on the West Coast. You don't believe this story, and I don't blame you. It sounds ridiculous. You probably shouldn't believe it. I hate bullshit paranormal stories. Believe it or not, I am a skeptic. I believe that people that have experienced something strange or believe in the paranormal should be skeptic. I enjoy debunking paranormal videos and pictures because I want the truth. Was I hallucinating? It's entirely possible I had an extreme and sudden hallucination. Guess that's not completely unheard of. This event had a huge impact on my life and completely affected the way that I view the world. The paranormal, religion, everything, really. Death was accompanied by the patter of nurses' rubber-soled shoes marching briskly along the linoleum floors, the smell of antiseptic solution, a gurney wheel in need of oil, squeaking rhythmically as another patient was rushed past, starchy white sheets and sharp angular shapes of nurses' headdresses. My body revolted against the crisp order in violent explosions of browns, greens, and yellows against the bleached hospital whites. Veins stood out on my small, pale neck and splittled from my mouth as I screamed. The cool bed sheets, tucked with neat, stern hospital corners, were twisted into angry, damp knots against my writhing body. I'm normally a neat, demure person, so you can imagine my cringing in horror at this loud, violent, and messy departure. I shudder when my mind invariably drifts to remember it. I'm happily brought back to the present, the distant iron clang of the cemetery gate. There's a reassuring, settled sameness about death. A contentment, cool, mossy, stone-strewn, calm, and painless. Life was harder, stressful. My father worked long days in crumbling mining tunnels, cut deep into the earth. He would return with his face etched deeply with coal dust, collapsing into wheezy snores on the small, hard bed. I remember, too, my mother's mouth, tight-lipped with constant worry and concealing my 2 chipped front teeth. I remember my baby brother, screaming with hunger and cold. The frigid earth was chipped, opened by large-shouldered men with axes and spades, when that brother died before the spring melt. Of course, there were some joyous moments, things I recollect with nostalgia. There's one thing I remember with a thrill of excitement. Alice Aldridge and I, on that summer morning. The air was already thick, humid, and buzzing with crickets as we ran into the creek. It was our favorite place in summer, this particular spot, where the water gathered, cool, shaded, in a gurgling pool of deep stone. That day, for the first time, we swam naked. Our girlish squeals were loud. We were exhilarated with the naughtiness of it, with the thrilling and mortifying possibility that someone might suddenly see us. When we got out to dress on the warm rocks, I turned to watch as she emerged, serpentine from the water. Beautiful was the thought that arrived. Of course, we both fell ill in the following days. She lived, but I died. I waited, aching, but Alice didn't arrive at Highgate Cemetery for another 60 years. As with all the others, a pile of earth was disgorged for her, in dark and damp clothes, worms struggling wetly into too bright air. I spent those few decades in hope, but she did not return after death in a ghostly form as I had. I remained alone. These days, my existence is mainly devoted to observing the predictable contours of the seasons. I sit for weeks on the shoulder of a stoned angel to watch the snow gradually recede from sun-filled valleys. I observe the daisies forcing their way through the frigid ground to greet the spring sun. I lie across the cracked stone on my own grave and watch as the raindrops hurtle towards the ground. Autumnal skies. I'm contained here by unknowable forces to this cemetery and the surrounding forest. I have little influence on the world around me, except maybe a slight parting of the wind as it moves around me. I'm impervious to dirt and mud, invisible even after bathing in the stagnant September moose swamps or lying across the summer-baked dirt roads. On swirling, freezing winter mornings, my bare feet barely leave perceptible prints as I walk across the lightest drifts, unnoticed by all but the lightest and most alert insects and birds, which I can occasionally convince to briefly perch on my unsubstantial form. I spend some of my time in the warmer months accompanying tour groups of motley children on school excursions. Modern people tend to burn their bodies, a morbid practice in my opinion, but it has a positive effect of converting Highgate Hill Cemetery into more of a commemorative museum than an active cemetery. This is a relief to me. Although I am without a body, I'm not without feelings. And I certainly used to find the wailing of grieving widows and the crying of children at the graves of recently dead ones very disturbing. I would stand with them as they cried, wearing an invisible expression of sober and respectful grief. Now instead, I join the children as they crowd around information boards about local history or in front of the graves and mausoleums. On one information board, there's a photo of some children from my schoolhouse, taken 2 years before I started there myself. They see us, but they don't really see us. These children of the present day, I watched mere inches from their faces as they conserved my temporaries. I can sense that understanding is lost somewhere in the colorlessness of the black and white image, or in our straight faces. Smiling wasn't exactly vogue in photographs of the time, or just by virtue of the clothing, which seemed strange and old-fashioned to them. We're not so different, you know, I explain, although they can't hear me. The tour guide does nothing to help. My grave, for example, is used to describe the epidemic which gripped the valley in the early 20th century. It was allegedly caused by the town's water supply running through the corpses men crushed in mining disaster. Not a fact that I reveled in finding out about. Well, there's more to know about me than that, I say irritably. But this woman was born 1981, so I can't blame her for knowing very little about history. There's a fir tree near my grave which outdates this alleged expert of the past 2 decades. She tells the children about my tragic death at only 15 years of age. This death of mine, as she points out, was 1 year before the outbreak of the Great War. This provides a convenient segue to shepherd the trotting children to the next stand of graves. Sometimes I find it insulting that my death is merely a pivoting point towards more important and famous deaths, but perhaps I'm being overly sensitive. The children by this point are usually glazed. This is unsurprising. How can the children root themselves in the shifting sands of the past with facts and figures? 60 men dead in a mine collapse in 1913 at Coal Creek. 20 million men dead in the First World War. Better to tell them that Bert Lawrence, visible in the front row of the schoolhouse photo, has a visibly wet nose because he cried on the first day of school, or that we would all have snowball fights outside of the schoolhouse when school finished on the last day before Christmas break. Or I could tell them, I think, with wicked glee about Alice, smiling at me with sultry confidence. Then they would understand, I think, that young people in the faded photograph were not different from themselves. On a cool autumn morning, one girl from among another group of the shuffling, sniffling school children looked at my grave and said, to no one in particular, "Adelaide Quayle. Adelaide, like the city in Australia, and quail, like the bird." Her alert green eyes regarded my name with interest. I felt seen, recognized, even celebrated. "Yes," I cried, unheard. "Exactly, that's me." I followed the green-eyed girl, trying to be helpful, giving unheard but correct answers to the questions on the worksheet secured in her clipboard. I reluctantly farewelled her when her group left through the wrought iron gates 45 minutes later. I obsessed over the minute of this meeting for many glorious and delightful hours afterward. Now imagine my shock and joy when the girl, my new Alice, walked in through the gate only a week later, wrangling a golden puppy on a leash. I walked in with them from one gate to the next. I told her we could run together through the long grass once the weather warmed again. We could run to the creek. I could show her the spot, the cool, sheltered spot where the water's deep. The air would be hot, and we could drape our dresses on the warm rocks while we swim. Then the first sprinkling of snow dusted the tops of the distant ranges, an event I usually watch for, but I was too distracted to notice. Being unseen and unheard previously was a mild annoyance, but now it's become torturous. New Alice arrived most days in the evenings, dog on the leash, traveling from gate to gate, presumably as part of a larger loop. I screamed in agony and frustration each day as she left me, yearning to be seen, to be known, to feel, and to be touched again. Inspiration came one morning when I observed a dew-covered spider web, branching and complex, ordinarily invisible, but illuminated by its wetness in the bright morning sun. Nearby, a hummingbird was extracting nectar from a group of flowers. I hardened my heart and reached for the small bird, unsure what force my invisible fingers could produce. I was in shock as the hummingbird was grasped into my hand, its body practically weightless. I twisted its neck, divisively raised it to my lips. My invisible and blunt but persistent teeth tore sinewy body. Feathers twisted and fluttered to the damp earth as warm, small organs burst against my lips. Blood and entrails ran down my chin, coating my mouth and my face. The wait for her was torturous. I distractedly observed yellow leaves fluttering to the ground from the oak trees on the hill. Finally, the light started to ebb from the afternoon, turning the sky into a dust gray. I heard her approaching and stood at the gate's entrance, willing my nervous mouth, the contours of which I hoped were now at last visible, into a smile of greeting. At first I thought my plan had failed. There were only a few steps away, and continuing, unconcernedly. Suddenly, though, the dog stopped, eyes fixed on my face, and uttered a low growl. The girl, confused and worried, stopped as well. She looked at the dog, and followed its gaze to the space where I stood in front of them. My smile widened. I was exhilarated by my scheme, ready for the first time in over a century to be seen. My new Alice stumbled backwards, her eyes wide, and a scream beginning in her throat. There was a perfect moment before she ran where we looked directly into each other's eyes. He stared deeply into her face as he noticed her pale blue eyes. She stared right back at him, lowering himself to his knees while leaning forward. He breathed in her sweet scent. Though it wasn't all that he had smelled. No, it had been the metallic tang of blood. It filled his nostrils, causing him to turn his gaze downward, glancing at the dark puddle below his very feet. Her long legs were drawn together, knees hugging her chest. Her body was in a huddled position on the floor. A large grin stretched painfully on his lips. His hand shook while he glanced at his side. A bloodied knife was clutched tightly in his white fist. It was dropped. A loud clang echoed as the blade hit the basement cement floor. His fingers stretched and trembled as he fixated on the red that stained his skin. Hot tears began forming in his eyes as he sobbed with fear, but happiness. She's dead? She's dead. Dead! Sobs began to turn into laughter, maniacal laughter. He dropped his still shaking hands down into the settling blood puddle, then started swirling them around in a circular motion, spreading it all over the floor. His head snapped upwards as he looked at her frozen, pale face. He reached forward to touch her fingers. Their icy chill was almost comforting. Wet blood began dripping down his hand, falling into the puddle. He swipes the small serrated knife from the bloody floor in an instant and stares at it. He felt quite calm as he breathed in heavily. He made his first move to her head. The knife held up to her throat began moving left and right just like a saw, skin starting to tear and blood spurting from the wound. Finally hitting bone, the knife quickly became obsolete as he began tearing at her throat with his bare hands. The sound echoed inside his mind as he continued to gradually tear at her remaining flesh, feeling every drop of blood splatter on his face and into his smiling grin. With a yank and a snap, he pulls her head off, holding the severed limb in his hand in front of his face as he stares once more at her pale, drained complexion. He throws it to the side like a discarded plaything. Next, he whispers huskily at her decapitated head, now lying across the room on its side, facing him, watching him. He turns his head to her arms, looking at them with the same sadistic grin from before. And now he thought, for the fingers.